Welcome to Detoxicity, a podcast by men, about men, and for everyone. My name is Mike Joseph. I created this show back in 2020 with the design to create an alternate, or maybe not even an alternate, a wider picture of what masculinity means. And the way we do that on the show is by storytelling, the sharing of people's lives. Each episode contains an interview with a different person, and I brought some folks back two, three, or even four times to expand on their stories. But we're really talking about becoming the best possible version of ourselves, whatever that entails. And sometimes we tell the stories with humor. Sometimes the stories are sad. Sometimes the stories might be a little difficult to listen to, as I'm sure they're difficult for my guests to speak about. But the end goal of these stories, the end goal of these episodes, the end goal of this podcast is always to create a version of masculinity that is inclusive of vulnerability, inclusive of personal growth, inclusive of all things that are good. There's been a lot of talk recently about toxic masculinity, and there's a part of me that almost regrets naming the podcast Detoxicity because masculinity, in and of itself, is not toxic. The way that many of us have been socialized over the years, the way it is practiced, and toxic masculinity is not only practiced by men, um, the way that these traits that are not exclusive to men, but are generally ascribed to men that are toxic, need to be addressed and need to be changed. And that is what I intend to do with this show. Again, we've been going since 2020, so 5 years, 200 episodes, and I think we're just skimming the surface of what this podcast and what the people who come on this show and are so open and so vulnerable and honest can do. I thank you very much for listening. If you want to follow me on social media, I am on Instagram at DetoxPodGuy. You can follow my Substack, mikejoseph.substack.com. You can also subscribe to my Patreon. Doing this podcast does cost money, and I'm probably taking a loss on this, but that's fine. If you want to chip in a couple of bucks, you can subscribe for as little as $3 a month, and you get episodes a week early. That is detoxpod.patreon.com or bit.ly/detoxpod plus. I really, really appreciate you listening. I hope you get something from whatever episode you happen to be listening to at any given time. And I hope that you go on to take care of yourself and take care of the people around you. I'm sure there are plenty of people who would love to ask their therapist things like, how do you cope with life? Or what made you decide to be a therapist? Well, I can't ask my therapist that, and I'm not so sure that you can ask your therapist that, but I can ask a therapist that, and I do just that in this particular episode. I am talking to Ari Jacobson, who is the clinical director of an organization that you are aware of if you are a longtime listener of this podcast called Backline. Backline.care provides mental health and wellness resources for music industry professionals and their families. Excuse me. They've been around since 2019 and they do fantastic work. I have worked with Backline in a number of capacities, including as a client of theirs. And Ari is a wonderful person, and his story is pretty fascinating. I don't know how you go from being a bouncer to being a therapist, but I also feel like those jobs are connected in some way, shape, or form. Anyway, Ari talks all about his story. He talks about a lot of his coping mechanisms for being a therapist. He talks about being a dad of two boys and what it's like to raise young men at this stage in time. He talks about his body kind of breaking down due to being an athlete in high school and college. He talks about his interesting upbringing in Baltimore as a Jewish person. There's so much packed into this episode. I'm so excited for you to hear it. So, everybody, here is Ari Jacobson.
So my name is Ari Jacobson. I am born and raised Baltimore, Maryland. I still live right outside Baltimore with my family and my wife and two kids. I have worked in mental health since about early 2011, where I started my career working in court mandated outpatient substance abuse and domestic violence work. So I worked with men who had been arrested for domestic violence, usually either under the influence of something or had been a long history of something. So when they went to court, got sent to both treatment programs. And then I transitioned into community mental health, where I worked for over a decade. And then I now am the clinical director of Backline, which we are a national nonprofit that helps people who are in the music industry and their family members get connected with mental health and wellness resources. And so, along with that, I still have a small private practice and I still see clients just on the side. But yeah, that's a little bit about who I am.
Nice. So, what got you into mental health? I'm always curious when I speak to clinicians, what was the impetus for you to decide to do this as a vocation?
Oh man, this was never the plan.
Really?
No, it never was.
What was your original plan?
I started college as a business major. I thought I was actually going to go into advertising. I loved the idea of creating ads and doing that kind of thing, which is funny because now I have no interest in marketing. But the honest truth is, I had taken AP psychology in high school, and I had a really, really great professor who was very much into the idea of like psychology can be used in all different careers. So I had always thought that I was going to go get a business degree. I had started taking a psychology course my first semester just because I thought they would be helpful for just any kind of career path that I was going to choose. And then I finished my first semester and had slept mostly through macroeconomics and was like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do accounting. And so I kind of took a semester to just keep taking some classes. I went to a small liberal arts school for college, so you had to take a class in everything. And while I was taking the prereqs, I started just filtering in some psychology classes because I assumed that I would need them for something. And then in the beginning of my sophomore year, I just kind of looked at the classes that I would be taking and what I wanted to take and realized that a psychology major was just going to be the best path for me. So I even figured that I would get a degree in psychology and still go into marketing and advertising, figuring I could spin that as a way of, a good thing in an interview. And then in my senior year of college, I took piano lessons, which got me class credit. I had played piano my entire life.
Wow.
Yeah, I grew up playing the piano. I stopped in the end of high school because sports just took over my life and I didn't have time. And then I learned that while I was in college, if I agreed to take piano lessons, I could get a half a class credit. So I took them throughout my time and filled a lot of like elective classes. And so then my senior year, I had the option, instead of taking a class, I could get an internship that could also be paid. So I had gotten connected with one of my professors who had worked at a preschool that was right local in Allentown where I was in college. And it was a preschool for kids with developmental and behavioral delays. A lot of my kids were somewhere on the autism spectrum. And I had like 8-year-olds who were in preschools and kindergarten just because of the nature of everything they were dealing with. And I ended up working there for a year, getting class credit and working. And I was, 3 weeks into my senior year, and I was like, I got to take the GREs and go to grad. I at least need to know if I'm going to go to grad school. I might as well just take the GREs. And then I took the GREs and said, I want to keep doing this, and ended up going to school for counseling and kind of stumbled into the rest of this work. There was a point I thought I'd be a kindergarten teacher, but when I decided that I had none of the classes to be able to get a teaching certificate, I backtracked and just kept it with the psychology thing.
Interesting. I would imagine a big part of teaching kids is like understanding them. So if you know psychology, you're way ahead of the game.
Yeah. And there were plenty of students who got degrees in psychology, but then to actually teach in any state, you have to get a certain number of prereqs and student teach and all that. And when I think my middle of my junior year, I was like, oh, maybe I'll think about becoming a teacher. And one of my friends who is now a teacher was like, you're going to have to start all the way from the beginning. Oh. And small liberal arts schools are way too expensive to just start all over again. So that was just kind of a blip on my radar. It never really even became a possibility.
Gotcha. So it seems like this was a little bit practicality, a little bit actual love.
Yeah, it's funny as I look back, and I've talked to my parents and friends about this. I've always had this fascination with psychology and the human brain. There was a very long part of my life where I was confident that I was going to I wanted to work in the prison systems, specifically with violent offenders. And that was my plan through grad school. And then right as I was starting to look for my first internship, I applied to uh, all the local prisons that I could at least get to from where I was in downtown Baltimore. And the honest truth is there's just so few spaces because they're high risk. There's not a ton of services and I couldn't get an internship. So I ended up working for the clinic I worked at, which was all mostly violent offenders who were now on probation or parole doing domestic violence abuser intervention work. And so I did that for 4 years and I was good at it. And honestly, just it got to the point I didn't feel like what I was doing was therapy anymore. And I felt like I was more of a probation officer.
Mm.
And so I tell the story frequently about understanding your own burnout. But I remember leaving on a Friday and thinking I had the best job. I loved what I did. Again, I was good at it. And then I came in on that Monday morning and there was a message for me and I was getting told that it was my fault that one of my former clients who I hadn't seen in months was getting violated because his probation officer found out he hadn't been coming to and he had been discharged and it was this whole thing and how I was going to make him miss all these birthdays and all these kinds of things. And right then and there, I was like, I'm not helping anybody right now. This is unfortunately just not the setting I want to be in. So I interviewed with a clinic that week and I quit my job that week. I gave him 6 weeks notice and I phased myself out of there.
Wow. This sounds like the understatement of the year. I would imagine working in the prison system is difficult and challenging.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I had everything. Gosh. And I always say that I bear with my language. I only worked with men and men who identified as men.
Yeah.
And so the guys that I worked with, there were some very violent people that I worked with. And I was in an office. I had a panic button that I'd never used. And then I also worked in Baltimore City public schools doing drug and alcohol counseling. And I was in 3 or 4 of the schools that were on the persistently dangerous list. And even there, honestly, I felt safe. I felt like they appreciated the fact that I was trying, but I was also very well aware of my surroundings and where I sat in a room and how close I sat to people. Just because I guess I should also mention that at the same time that I was doing drug and alcohol and domestic violence work, it was while I was in grad school and first coming up and establishing myself. So I was also at the time working in concert venues and bars and nightclubs doing security work and crew work and stage work and all that kind of stuff.
So, quick note, because you and I have spoken a lot via teleconferencing, and I've not met you in person. You don't come across on Zoom as a particularly big dude. Am I missing something here? Okay, all right.
No. Oh man, to keep this long story short, so in downtown Baltimore, there is a large nightclub bar venue that also has concerts in it, and now there's 3 concert venues in it that I worked at for 4 or 5 years. My brother at the time was working there as well, and he's 4 years older than me. And my senior year, when I would come home for breaks, one of the clubs that he was working security in, they would need just honestly a warm body to stand in a corner. And so I spent a handful of nights working security and just kind of understanding the ropes of what happens in bars and also concerts. I stood, they would just put me in front of a stage and make sure people weren't crowd surfing and that kind of stuff. And then I came home from college and I needed a job and nobody would hire a college student. I tried to bartend, I tried retail, and I couldn't even get an interview. And I was at the point where I was really looking for anything, and my brother was like, just come on down and at least just start getting some hours, and we need some people. And I ended up just working. And so I'm about 5'10" on a good day. I'm about 200 pounds, but I was a Division III lacrosse player, so I was coming out in decent shape. But where did I thrive? I got very, very good with fake IDs. Yeah, I used to meet with the Baltimore City police officers and teach them all about fake IDs and how you could tell them. And So I worked a front gate for 4 years. And the truth is, I was getting an education on how to talk to people. And so I was very good at just de escalating and managing things. But I've also, unfortunately or fortunately, been more bar scuffles than ever necessary. So yeah, I was definitely an outlier. I was the smallest of all the security guards I worked with by far.
Right.
Um, but in the times where I was working in more of the venue spaces, there I was just like hanging picture like things backstage and signs and green room stuff and all that kind of space.
So it sounds like, based on your employment history, you've put yourself in some pretty high risk situations. Is there a thrill seeker that lives within you, or are you like an extreme sports guy, or jump out of planes, or like?
Yeah, I never the total extreme sports thing. I've been skiing one time in my life. I but I definitely will was a thrill type seeker. I played sports my entire life. High school I played soccer, basketball, and lacrosse, and then I played lacrosse at a small Division 3 college. So I've always had just a very big competitive type spirit. I also have an older brother who used to beat me up all the time, so had to learn to kind of manage that. But it's something where people have asked me that a lot about if I ever felt in danger or worried or have any issues while I was working. And now I look back and realize it's some of the really wild situations that I was in. But at the time, no, I worked with a bunch of guys who I still know today. And we all worked together for like when one of us left, all of us ended up leaving, and we all kind of came at the same time. So for about 4.5, 5 years, I worked with the same 8 guys and girls, and then eventually other people trickled in. So I felt really protected by the people around me.
Sure.
But there were known biker gangs that there were situations. I've seen police have to get involved. It's Baltimore City, and you never know
I've
what's
seen The
going on down
Wire.
there. Yeah. But that's kind of the situations that I was in. And the truth is, the schools that I was working in, I will be very honest that if you've seen season 4 of The Wire, that is the school not that specific one, but that is what I was working in. I worked in one school where most of the kids were on some sort of GPS system because of crimes that they had been, charged with. And most of the kids I was seeing were on probation. Um, but I lost all that thrill and excitement once I retired or I got out of college. I had some surgeries on injuries that I've had, and now I'm just too worried to hurt myself and trying to stay. I'm a year post Achilles surgery, so I think that will hopefully be my last one.
I mean, knock wood. I hope that is the last one for you. I mean, I have had several friends in the last 4 or 5 years who have unfortunately torn their Achilles, and the recovery, it seems like it's insane.
Yeah, I tore my Achilles on April tax day in 2024. I only hurt myself on major holidays apparently. That was pretty bad. It's a long recovery. I heard it in April, and I completed physical therapy and released back into the wild or normal in October. But I also, in my other foot, I tore what's called your Lisfranc tendon, which runs across the top of your foot. It kind of holds the whole foot together. I did that on election night 2016. Yeah, I only hurt myself on major holidays.
Jeez, you're
That
banged up, bro.
Yeah, that was really a long, long, long recovery. That was 12 weeks of non-weight bearing and another 8 weeks of like in a scooter and all sorts of stuff.
Man,
Um, yeah,
got to wrap you
So
up in plastic.
if there is a friend who, if he will listen to this someday, he will be sitting here going, "I've been saying that all along." Yeah, I've had a handful of concussions. I broke my hand in college and had surgery. Just been a
Yikes.
bruiser all these years.
Holy crap. So, how does Backline then enter the picture?
So Backline comes into the picture. I don't know the exact date because I came into the Backline universe before we were even keeping track of when we were meeting people. So Backline actually started in October of 2019, and somewhere around May or June of 2020, the pandemic had hit, and my wife or at the time, was a rotating nurse. She was working inpatient oncology at Hopkins. And she worked 3 weeks of days, 3 weeks of nights, and every other weekend. And at some point in that pandemic summer, I was home alone and she was at work. And I had all these friends who were quitting their jobs because the pandemic had hit. They were shifting careers and finding new things. And I was just like, maybe now's my chance.
Mm.
And so I just started really trying to think about like what I could do and what other opportunities I could have. And I honestly went on Google and typed in music and mental health just to see what even existed. And Backline was this first website to pop up along with Music Cares. And so I read all about Music Cares. At the time, Music Cares, the only things that they had, well, nothing was really even, they weren't hiring anything because of the pandemic.
Pandemic, right?
And at the time, Music Cares just wasn't even like, I could have joined in terms of their referral network, but I was looking for a real job, honestly. And Backline had the website popped up and I went through it and I thought it was pretty cool. And then for that, it was later into my search and I was like, you know what? There's a thing to just join the referral network. I'll just join. I also, in my head, I'm like, I don't know how many people are in Maryland. I'm in Maryland. Maybe they'll want me in because I didn't know the process of like if you apply and you get interviewed, accepted, and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So, actually, now that I'm thinking about this, I can tell you what happened because I had my call with Backline in an apartment I was living in July of 2020, and so in August of 2020, excuse me. And so I have the call with, at the time, one of the people who was working with Backline, and about, I guess, 6 weeks later, I get a call saying, hey, we have a client who's in Maryland who's looking for a male therapist. And I also took his insurance. And so I started seeing the client, and then I got a second, and I was like, whoa, this is great. I felt like I was tapping back into a community that I hadn't really been involved in for quite some time. Also, in the meantime, while working at power plant, like I have friends who tour, who are still touring, and like I live practically next door to them. So watching them go through the whole process and kind of doing it at the same time, living that weird lifestyle was a really unique thing. And, I just kept in touch and I started emailing the people who I'd been talking to with Backline saying like, at the time I was working in a community outpatient clinic. I was working 4 days a week, so I had a whole day off. And I was just looking for anything else. And I just would say, like, hey, I don't know what Backline is, but I have a history of writing programs and creating different programs. I work for an accreditation board. I'm the clinical director of an outpatient clinic right now. Is there anything that you all need help with? Just let me know and I'll volunteer time. We just kept in touch. Nothing really happened from that. And then in the summer of 21, I got an email that our clinical director at the time for Backline was going to be stepping out. He had his full-time job and another project he was working on that eventually got big, and he just needed to dedicate the time. And so I called him and I said, I'm just curious, what are you all looking for? And at the time it was a 8 to 10 hour a week job. And they really didn't even know what they were going to do with the clinical director because truthfully, Backline was created by music industry people who were all friends and honestly just started losing friends to suicide. And so when Backline got built, the clinical portion of Backline really kind of came secondary because it was more about just finding people help. So they were trying to figure out if they were going to keep a clinical director or not. And I honestly was like, I'm not going to take on another job while I have a job. I'm hoping to get out of this. And so I graciously was like, I appreciate the thought. I'm not going to apply just because I don't want to waste anybody's time. And probably, I don't know, 4 weeks later, I got a call from him again saying, what happened? I thought you were going to apply for the job. And I've always been a big believer that if somebody asks you to apply for something, you just apply.
Probably do it.
And so I applied and I had my first interview. And right from the first interview, I was just like, not only do I want to obviously do this, but I think I can do this. And that's when I realized how really itty bitty the whole thing was. And I ended up going through, I think they put me through like 4 interviews. I had to give a writing sample. I had to get references, and then they offered me the job. And so at the time, I was working 4 days a week for my full-time job, and I agreed that I would spend my other day working 8 to 10 hours that day. It was still the pandemic, so I was home doing nothing. And that's what just got me started. And then I worked from October of 21 until, I guess, for 2 years as part-time. And then last year, in the beginning of 24, I transitioned to full-time.
Nice.
Yeah, honestly, we need more full-timers. We just need to grow in general. But we hit a good point where I was going to either look for a new job regardless, and I was at a place where I could transition some things and I had some flexibilities, and Backline just had some really big needs in terms of growth. And if we were going to grow, then we needed to bring on a couple people full-time, and it all just kind of worked out.
I love it. And first of all, Zach has been on the show as well.
Oh, okay, good.
So, audience, go back a couple of years to listen to Zach Bohr's episode.
Yes, please
He's doing
do.
wonderful things.
So Zach's the one who had the original first call with me.
Right.
And then Zach and I communicated and talked for sure. So yeah, definitely go back and give it a listen.
Yeah. So what is it? I guess what is it that really gratifies you about mental health? I mean, and I guess the other part of that is what gratifies you about music.
Mm-hmm.
And do you feel like you're in the right place, being at a place that brings the two together?
Yeah, this is the happiest I think I've ever been in my career, to be honest with you. Community mental health is a really tough place to work. I frequently get congratulated or praised for making it through 10 full years of being employed in a community mental health space. And then along with that, also the 3.5 years plus an internship or whatever that timing worked out. And so with just everything that comes along with community mental health, which ends up, you have clients who come into your office and then are like, I don't have a home or I have nowhere to go. And you're trying to help problem solve, and you feel like you're pushing this rock up a hill until eventually it's just going to roll back down and you just got to start all over again. And I really cherish the work I did in community mental health. I think I did really well, and I put a lot into it, and I learned so much. I don't think I would be able to do this job as successfully as I am now without everything I got from community mental health.
Sure.
But the difference that I get now is like, when we help people, we get so many people just reach out to let us know all the things that we've helped them do and how much they appreciate it. And you see the impact we're doing on a daily basis. And it's not that I don't see that when I did it with community mental health. It's just that the issues that were going on were so much bigger, that the problems were so much more complex, where now, I don't know if you've ever looked for a therapist online, but it's impossible.
Many times.
Impossible. And I've even talked frequently about myself when I looked for one, and it took me forever. And that was forever when I was willing to be virtual anytime, Monday through Friday during the day, anytime. And I was looking for a male therapist, and I wanted somebody who had worked with therapists before. And it took me months.
Why is that?
Nobody responds. I was put on a bunch of wait lists. I had one person offer that they could see me, but it had to be at 6:30 in the evening. And I'm the reverse, where that's bedtime for my kids. And I was looking for 2 p.m. And I wanted to use my insurance, which my Blue Cross Blue Shield Care First insurance shouldn't have been terribly difficult. But I sent out 30 emails, 40 emails before I even started getting a couple people to respond, and a lot of people just responding saying they weren't taking new clients.
Sure. Yeah.
And then with the music stuff, I look back to projects I did when I was a first grader in a career fair, and I was doing music things, and I wanted to fix pianos at some point, and then I always said I wanted to be in a band, but I never. Now we look back and probably call it anxiety, but I just never got up on a stage and performed. But
it's not too late.
It's not too late. But I just found two things that I truly love, and mental health was always just the thing. I think the way that we all grow up in a similar way, but we have these different experiences and we all look at the world so wildly different is fascinating. And I could sit and listen to people's perspective on watching paint dry just because I think it's so incredible to understand why people think the way they do. And in therapy, at least with the therapist that I am, it's very eclectic or existential and eclectic. Like we're looking at everything. I want to know the whys. I want to know the what ifs. So to brainstorm with somebody to just like spitball and throw out some ideas and see what sticks and try and truly understand something that maybe really doesn't even have an answer, I've always found so fascinating.
So, when you were a kid, did you have a concept even of what mental health was, or what psychologists did, or therapists did, or anything to that effect?
A lot of skewed misconceptions. I I remember I had a friend in school whose parent was a psychologist. I can't remember if they prescribed or not. But I knew that they ran a private practice and they helped people, and he was very successful and known in the community. I remember that in the school I went to, we had a school guidance counselor, but she only ever saw kids that were like, if a kid was going to see her, you knew that something was going on. It was always a resolution to a problem rather than a kid just looking for a support from somebody at school. And I remember years of being in school and not having school counselors there. And then I got truly introduced to what they all do my senior year of high school from the teacher that I had who taught AP psychology. And him and I used to sit and just talk about all different. He was also, ironically, this was a guy who taught. I went to a small Jewish day school, a small private school, and my father had the same teacher when he was at the local public school
Oh, wow.
40 years earlier. And this was a teacher who back in the whatever years it was, I guess like the 70s, was bringing in people who were homeless and people at the time who were gay and people who had just been released from prisons, and he was bringing them to the local public to the school and having them speak. And so my dad always remembered that this one teacher in particular was very, his goal in life was always to get you to understand other people and understand perspectives. And he did the same thing when I was in school, where I remember him bringing, we had an assembly where four guys who had just gotten off of, they were on parole. One was had served all this time for attempted murder, and they came and talked to the school, and he had orchestrated the entire thing. And him and I used to just talk and talk and talk about everything that he had done throughout his life, um and that's just kind of what got me into the idea of even wanting to work with violent offenders. And then I used to, even before Netflix, I mean, I could show you DVDs back here of hours and hours of serial killer documentaries that I just, anything that was off the beaten path was just so fascinating to me.
Are you a true crime podcast
Not
person?
anymore.
Okay.
Not anymore. My wife is, though. I watch a lot of the Netflix stuff, but no, I'll tell you, actually, from my years of working in mental health, it's mindless comedy type stuff because
Yeah,
of
you
it.
probably don't need anything
Mm-mm.
that reminds you how crappy the world is at this point.
Yeah, I want something. My sense of humor has gotten so like slapstick. I love a good silly joke. I can mess around and take nothing seriously because I've always just said like spend so much time taking the world seriously that I just don't want to take it seriously when I'm relaxing.
I hear you there, for sure. Obviously, mental health is a major passion of mine, and it's what are some practical things that the average person can do to take better care of their mental health?
Hmm. Well, in general, I would say it's the obvious: diet, exercise, finding something that you love. I can speak for myself that, like, after surgery, when I wasn't able to exercise, and now that I'm back up and running and I'm able to get myself onto a routine, and even the days I hate going to the gym, when I'm able to do something hard, like go to the gym and exercise and get to the other side of it, and even start or end my day knowing that I've done something like that, it allows me to find little wins throughout my week. So I make sure I pay attention to my day. So like if I wake up late, then I want to try and find a small win so that I'm not just looking at how everything was, oh, I got up late today and now my day is ruined. So okay, oh, started late, but at least I got this one thing finished that I thought was going to take me longer. Or at least I sat down at my computer at the right time and I just didn't get a chance to do this. I'm a very positive, optimistic person because I've spent so many years seeing so many horrible things and hearing about all these horrible things for clients that I've talked to, that I have just been able to very much understand with myself that if I just take a more positive perspective on it, I can usually find some sort of nice rationalization through it. And then with that, building a support network. I know that at least I can speak, our generation was not taught to talk with each other and definitely not share feelings. And I was not raised that way. I was raised to talk. I am long-winded and I love to talk.
Perfect for this podcast.
But I am quick to tell somebody if I'm not feeling good. I'm quick to tell somebody if I'm happy. I will share anything about me, very open. And I find that when I am able to build that and keep my community close to me and transparent, then I think between eating the right way and exercising the right way and also finding something that you love to do, whether it's gym or sports or music, whatever it might be, like you just have to make sure you're finding that time for it as well. I'm also very good at like the second my day ends, computer closes and work doesn't exist until I open it back up the next day.
Smart man.
Mm-hmm.
You talk about being open, and a lot of the conversations that I have for this podcast are about openness and that sort of vulnerability sort of being socialized out of men at a young age. So, as people age, they don't know how to get in touch with the feelings that pop up. Were you always an open person, or was there a pivotal thing that happened? How did that process take place?
I pretty much remember always being a pretty open person, especially about the things that were not like the hard feelings. I definitely remember being more reserved as a younger child. But even then through high school, I started to kind of realize the benefit of being a little bit more open. I talk a lot with my parents. I still do. And so I guess just from years and years of talking to them and my brother, who I'm also very close with. So no, I would actually tease and joke that if anything, at times it's not the problem that I'm not sharing. It's that at times I'm sharing too much and people are like, you don't need to tell everybody everything.
I don't know that that's really a thing. I definitely catch myself sometimes because it's like even recently I was having a drink with someone that I was only meeting for the second time. And I'm talking and I was like, hey, look, I'm an oversharer. So, just letting you know that off the rip. And he's like, no, it's fine. And I'm like, Mike, why are you, if you want to connect with somebody, you got to be real with them. So that sometimes means running your mouth until they tell you to stop.
Yeah. Right. I've also, especially once I've really gotten into this field, I'm very good at compartmentalizing. So if I am upset about something, or I think you did something that is going to upset me, I am very good at not reacting. I will hold it, I will process it, and then if I need to react, I will do it later. Some of that is my own guilt of not wanting somebody else to be upset, and I can manage my own emotions, which that is an unhealthy thought in and of itself, but I recognize that. And the other part of it is that I also realize just from doing this work for so long how quick impulses can just take over. And so I'm not shy to say, like, I don't want to talk about this right now. Let's talk about it later. Or I'm also a lot better if I can write things down. So it's not necessarily that I want to like have a conversation via text. It's that I need to put it into a text message or an email so I can like make sure it's exactly what I want to say. It's the right way to say it. And then I will read it to you if you need to hear tone and inflection, but I need to actually have something like that just ready for me. So that way I don't worry about leaving something unsaid or incorrectly expressed.
That's really interesting. Something I struggle with is impulsivity. And when I get upset, it's like I things build, and then like the domino falls over, and then you get every single thing that you fucked up on at the same time, and it comes out in not the greatest way. And I'm slowly learning how to manage that and think before I speak, take a couple laps around the block. Just give space, always give space before responding, because the response that immediately comes up in your head is probably not the response you're going to ultimately want to go with. So the writing stuff down, even if it's in like a text or an email, that sounds like a really smart thing to do.
I can't tell you the amount of people from working in management positions where I've heard something and been like, we got to fire them. I'm like, you're not going to fire that person. A, you love working with them. They're a great worker. You're frustrated about something. Maybe and like, I need to run through some of those things before, especially making a difficult decision, because despite being in careers now for 10 years where I've had to make difficult decisions frequently, I dread them. I really try, and I don't love making hard decisions. But I've gotten good at it because I am able to just compartmentalize and rationalize things in my mind and say, well, I may not like this, but this is the reason why, or also just taking another perspective. And that comes from years of working with clients who have very different worldviews that I do and very different perspectives. And instead of just totally disagreeing with them and getting frustrated with myself that I'm meeting with somebody who has a completely incorrect or a different view than I do, instead, I have always looked at it of like, well, then help me understand how you got to that perspective. So A, I can see if something I can just shift with you, or, maybe you and I just will forever look at something differently, because if I had grown up the way you did in your life, then I probably would.
That is a level of empathy, A, again, that I aspire to, and B, that I just don't think a lot of people have the skill set to understand and appreciate. And this is sort of a variation of the last question I asked, but the empathy button, where'd that come from for you? Because I feel like empathy isn't like, it's not, I feel like it's one of those things like vulnerability, right? It's innate, and then it gets beaten out of you, metaphorically, sometimes literally. It gets beaten out of you, and you have to sort of find that again. And a lot of people don't. So how did you develop the empathy that you have?
I think, obviously, like you said, there's got to be something inherent, because I even just think to be in a field like this, you have to be willing to even sit and recognize that you're going to be helping people with other problems that are not your own. And so that, I think some of it came from my upbringing. Like, I remember even growing up, every year I was going to soup kitchens with my brother and my dad on Thanksgiving. We spent in Baltimore, there's a foundation that does soup kitchens that we became very active with. I worked for Habitat for Humanity for 2 summers while my brother worked there for a couple of years. So I built houses and everything, so a bunch of nonprofit work at the time, just because it was just encouraged. And then honestly, a lot of the empathy then just got taught to me throughout working in this field of like, if you're going to have any kind of longevity, then you have to try and understand people's perspectives and not take it on as your own. And so I think part of my empathy in this field came from honestly just doing the work and then actually hearing other people's experiences, and then just having that realization of, oh, you feel like you made this bad decision, or you think that whatever it is, but if I'd been in your exact situation, I probably would be telling you the exact same story. And once you realize that in those situations that you, in theory, like want or can judge somebody for being in this situation, and then you realize that you would have just done the exact same thing. Or I think back to times where I made similar decisions and somehow got out of whatever trouble or situation that ended up coming in, whether it was sheer luck or privilege or whatever got me out of whatever stupid thing I did. And then I look back and go, how lucky I am that I don't have a criminal record and that I haven't had this, and this happen. And so once you start to realize that you could have equally been in those same spaces, then you just start to kind of really want to just understand everybody else's understanding of what they went through, and honestly how they avoided some of that stuff too.
And that's a valuable insight. I mean, there's a lot of there before the grace of God in the world, right? And similarly, I mean, my life could have, and maybe in some cases should have, gone in a lot of different directions than the one that it went in. And there's a variety of reasons why it didn't. And some of it is luck. Some of it is, intuition, ingenuity, whatever. Some of it is the grace of others. But it's also really important, I think, to not only understand how you got to where you are, but to try to understand how other people got to where they are, and understand that no two people's path is the same.
Hmm. And I grew up in Baltimore, technically in Baltimore City, and I say technically just because you threw a rock and you hit the county line. But the reason that so I grew up in a very Jewish neighborhood in Baltimore City. Had I gone to the local public school, I would have gone to a school where I most likely would have been probably one of the few white kids that would have been attending there. I went to a Jewish day school where it was all white, and I have this other odd perspective on kind of life because my brother is adopted. So my brother's adopted from Chile. My parents picked him up when he was 2 weeks old, and my brother is brown. So I have this experience of living with somebody who physically does not fit into the community that he is being raised in. He also, from the moment he was adopted, back in the day when my parents adopted him through the American Adoption Agency, one of the requirements was that he had to know that he was adopted. And they wanted to make sure that he grew up knowing that he was adopted. So I always knew that my brother had come from another family and we had adopted him and all that kind of stuff. But then I watched my brother go through all these experiences that I did not go through, living in this all white neighborhood where I walked into the synagogue and people didn't bat an eye at me, but I can't tell you the number of times people thought my brother was the help because he just doesn't fit into that small, tiny little community.
Right.
But then at the same time, I lived in this neighborhood where my next door neighbors were two guys who had been together for 30 years and were back then before gay marriage was allowed, and they were living together. And my parents, I was encouraged to go hang out with them, and I walked their dog all the time. And we had other people in the neighborhood that I was really encouraged to go just expose myself to. And my parents weren't the kind to ever tell us not to do things. And so that's how I ended up working at Habitat for Humanity when I was a sophomore in high school. I built a house for people who were in the Bloods, and I built a house for people who were in the Crips. And I
Wow.
met both of them. And being able to come home and tell my parents that, and it wasn't this, oh my God, it was A, I'm glad you're safe. B, make sure you don't make any dumb promises, but recognize who these people were and how you ended up in this type of situation. And so just growing up, I was always recognizing and told to expose myself to other communities, which was really great because there were other people in my community who were not always encouraged or didn't have those opportunities.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like your parents were pretty progressive.
Yeah, my dad grew up really, really, really poor. And so my dad's father passed away when he was 16, I think. And so then my dad, who barely has a high school education, started working in home improvement sales when he was a junior in high school and is still doing it today. And then my mom on the other side grew up in a rather religious Jewish family. Her father passed away right before I was born. So she had a tight knit family growing up, not wealthy, but comfortable, middle class. And then truthfully, my parents have been together since my dad was 16 and my mom was 14.
Whoa.
Yeah. So my parents are about to celebrate 50 years of marriage.
Congratulations, Ari's
Thank you.
parents.
Yes, thank you. But it's also something that even that alone, I recognize the value in that I have parents who are still together and in a wonderful relationship. And I was exposed to that growing up. And so a lot of these little things, like we said, with luck, where, I had parents who were willing to let me go try certain things or, grew up in a tight community. I was sent to a good school and I had these opportunities. So I recognize that for me. And for so many years, I worked with so many people who just didn't have that.
Right. Right. So you are now raising two boys.
Trying.
You're halfway, trying is half the battle. What are the challenges you face raising two boys in 2025?
It's such a great question because I think one of the hardest challenges is that there is so much information out there. And I will not be the one to sit here and talk about correct versus incorrect or fakes or not fake or whatever it might be. There's just information. And the truth is, if you want to go out there and look up something, especially with parenting, and say, the way I'm doing it is the right way, you're going to find something that's probably going to tell you that you're doing it right. So I think the hardest thing right now is trying to sift through all the millions of pieces of information where, oh, my child just did this, I can chat GPT it, and they're going to give me an idea of why he's doing certain things. And there's so much oversight with everything nowadays that I think sometimes we lose the ability to just let kids figure themselves out. And I'm just as guilty at this. I am at times the most patient parent on the planet, and at times I can really lose my mind. But then, I think just everything in society and making sure that, I'm raising two boys. I want to make sure that they're going to come up and be respectful and respectful of everybody. And that's just a big thing with me. I happen to be a rather polite person. I think that comes from, again, working bar security and also working retail. For anybody listening, if you haven't worked a retail job, you should. You should
And
have.
I worked retail for 10 years.
Yeah, retail or customer service, something that's going to put you in front of a customer who's going to blame you for something you had nothing to do
That
with.
will, from a social experiment standpoint, it's a great thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
I think it teaches you humility.
Mm-hmm.
It teaches you problem solving. And I think I also cut you off. So,
No,
but yeah, so many good things can come out of that.
Yeah, but I just to not necessarily use or to coin that, the hot term of male toxic masculinity, but I'm a big believer that, as my son should be allowed to cry, and if there's certain things that he wants to enjoy or he doesn't like that's fine. I obviously want to push him in certain ways so that way I want him to enjoy things and find his own passions, but the hardest thing is also not pushing him to play lacrosse because I did.
I was just about to say that.
He's already into his second season at 4 years old, and it's starting to go well, and it makes me very happy. But
oh wow, nice.
But yeah, even just, I don't know if you can see the piano sitting here,
No.
but they come in and they just want to bang on the piano, and I want them to find that and find their own music and those kinds of things. So, just trying to let them be themselves is really the hardest thing that I thought would be a lot easier, but it's also kind of fun because they surprise you all the time. Especially if I have a 4 and he'll be 5 in August, and then I have a 2-year-old, and now seeing how especially the 2-year-old, just mimics the 4.5-year-old is unbelievable.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. Do they get along?
The older one, we laughed that if you saw the video of when we brought the new one home, he just kind of walked over, looked at him, and wandered away and didn't really care. He, for a good year and a half, asked when we were going to get rid of my youngest and when we were going to return him.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. And then I don't know what happened, but now they're like two peas in a pod. They're the best of friends, and then they fight like brothers and scream and yell at each other. But that's been fun because my brother and I are 4 years apart. They're about 2.5 years apart. And my brother and I grew up very close. We ended up living together for a while too after college. So just seeing them actually grow up about the same age and have the same interests and everything has been really fun.
What is the secret to having good? This is kind of a dumb question now that I think about it, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What are the secrets to having and cultivating and maintaining good relationships with other men, boys, whatever, other males?
Honestly, I think for any men who are listening to this, like I had a friend swing by last night because he's going through a rough patch and we just needed to talk it out. And you don't need to solve problems all the time. And as somebody who has been a therapist for a long time and people have, in theory, been coming to me to help them solve their problems for a long time, even like I said to him when he came over last night, I was like, we can just sit and I just want to hear what's going on. And if you need some feedback, I'll give you feedback. But the biggest thing is realizing that just because you're sharing something that's hard or sad or whatever it is, doesn't mean that I'm going to run away as a friend. And if you're going to run away as a friend of mine because I was sad or vulnerable to you, then
Not really a friend.
And we need to really evaluate why I thought we were friends, because if we're going to be friends, it's going to be mutually beneficial and not just a one-way type relationship.
Right. That's a really good point. And that actually also makes me wonder, how do you resist the urge to therapize when someone close to you is like, hey, Ari, this thing is happening in my life?
Because what did I tell you? When I shut my computer and the day is done. But actually, it's really funny. When I started grad school, my first couple classes like really scared the crap out of me about like, you're a therapist and these are when you can do therapy and like da da da. So I went honestly to most of my friends when I started school and I was like, I'm not your therapist. I will not be your therapist. I will help you find a therapist. And I have helped many of friends find a therapist just because I navigate the system better than the average person. But yeah, I mean, That's really it.
Smart man. Smart man. Damn.
Thank you, Ari, for taking time out of your professional and parenting schedule to talk to us. I really, really appreciate it. Once again, Ari is the clinical director at Backline. If you work in the music industry and you are looking for assistance in a mental health capacity, please reach out to Backline. You can find them at backline.care. Once again, backline.care. They are also on socials. You can find them on Instagram at Backline.care as well. And the whole team at Backline is great. So shout out to them. And Ari, once again, thank you for being on the show. You are welcome back anytime. I really do appreciate all of my guests who come into these conversations as the most authentic versions of themselves. And I've said it in a bunch of episodes now how I think authentic is starting to become an overused buzzword. But I really, really do think that the folks that I speak to, and certainly me as the host or facilitator, or however you want to put it, try to bring our most authentic, best selves into this podcast. I thank you for listening. If you are listening and enjoying, that means you are on a journey of some sort as well, and I'm happy to be on this journey with you. Once again, you can follow me on social media if social media is your thing. I am DetoxPod Guy on Instagram. I'm also at Mike Joseph Coaching on Instagram. I do have a coaching business, life and relationship coaching. You can, again, find me on the socials there. You can find me on my Substack, mikejoseph.substack.com. And if you want to subscribe to the Detox Pod, you'll get episodes a week early. Subscriptions on Patreon are as low as $3 a month. You can go to bit.ly/detoxpod plus. Thank you again for listening. I really, really do appreciate it.